She kept her ink-stained fingers steady on the bookplate, correcting the error, even as the laughter rose around her, refusing to let them watch her break. In a Boston ballroom, full of silk gloves and colder smiles, Abigail Harper was the one guest nobody had invited, and everybody wanted gone. Then a man who had refused 4 introductions that very night crossed the whole floor to stand beside her. If you love stories about being seen when the world looks away, subscribe and stay with me to the very end and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from, so I can see just how far this story travels. Ethan Caldwell had already said no 4 times, and the night was not yet an hour old. The first refusal had been gentle, the way a man refuses a second helping of soup he does not want. The second had been shorter. By the third, he had stopped pretending to smile, and by the fourth, he had simply looked at the woman being steered toward him, a Miss Pruitt of the Beacon Hill. Pruitt's all pearls and expectation, and said plainly, "No, thank you, but no," and watched her mother's face go the color of a scalded thumb. "You are making enemies," murmured the man beside him. "I reckon I was born making them," Ethan said. "Saves time to keep it up." His companion was Josiah Bell, the only man in the room Ethan could stand for more than a quarter hour, and Josiah had the good sense to laugh under his breath rather than lecture. The two of them stood near the tall windows at the end of the Winthrops' great room, where the July heat pressed against the glass and the candles guttered in it, and Ethan kept his back half turned to the crowd, the way a man keeps his back to a fire he's tired of tending. "Your father is watching you," Josiah said. "My father is always watching me. It's the only thing he does with real dedication. He'll hear about the Pruitt girl before your carriage is called. Then he'll hear the truth, which is more than he usually gets." Ethan took a slow breath. "I did not come to be sold, Josiah. I came because Winthrop said if I didn't show my face this once he'd take it personal, and I owe the man money." "You owe every man in this room money." "No, I lend every man in this room money. There's a difference, and they hate me for it." Josiah smiled into his glass. "You could try being pleasant." "I tried it once. Bored me half to death, and cost me a shipment of cotton besides." The room behind them was doing what such rooms always did. The Winthrop Summer Gala was the kind of gathering where a family's whole year could be made or unmade in the space of a country dance where marriages were arranged behind fans and fortunes measured in the cut of a coat. And Ethan Caldwell had spent 34 years learning to despise all of it with a precision that surprised even him. He had money. He had a name that opened every door in Boston and half the doors in New York. He had, by the reckoning of every mother in the room, everything a man could want, and he wanted none of it, and that made him dangerous, and they all knew it. "There," said Josiah, suddenly tipping his chin toward the far corner. "Now that is a thing you don't see every night." Ethan turned. In the corner, half hidden by a folding screen, the Winthrops had set up to hide a servant's door. A young woman sat at a small writing table with her head bent over a sheet of paper, and she was working. Not idling. Not waiting to be noticed. Working her whole body curved toward the task, one hand pinning the page flat, the other moving a pen in small, exact strokes, and even from across the room, Ethan could see the ink on her fingers, dark to the second knuckle, the mark of somebody who did the thing with her hands and did not care who saw. "Who is that?" "The Winthrop's library girl, I'm told. Harper's daughter. Old Josiah Harper, the classicist. You'd not remember him. He taught before your time and died with nothing but his books. She catalogs the collection. Winthrop keeps her on to make his shelves look learned." Josiah lowered his voice. "She wasn't meant to be down here tonight. Somebody sent for a document from the library, and she brought it herself instead of a footman, and now she can't get back upstairs without crossing the whole floor, so she stopped to fix whatever it is she's fixing." "Fix what? How should I know a bookplate looks like? Something's wrong with it, and she can't leave it be." Josiah shrugged. "Peculiar creature. Wouldn't survive 10 minutes in a real conversation, I expect." Ethan did not answer. He was watching the way she worked, the stillness of her, the total absence of the thing every other person in the room was drowning in, which was the need to be looked at. She had no need to be looked at. She had a page to correct, and she was correcting it, and the whole gilded circus around her might as well have been a field of wheat for all the notice she gave it. And then it stopped being possible to ignore her, because Nathaniel Whitmore found her. Mature. Ethan heard Whitmore before he saw him. That particular carrying voice, pitched half a note louder than any room required, the voice of a man who had never once in his life been told to hush. "Now what in heaven is this?" The young woman did not look up. "I say, you girl, this is the Winthrop Summer Gala, not a counting house. Are we to have the servants doing their sums at the table now?" She finished her stroke. Only then did she set down the pen and lift her head, and her voice, when it came, was quiet and even and entirely unafraid. "I'm correcting a bookplate, sir. It won't take a moment more. A bookplate." Whitmore turned, already playing to the small crowd that a man like Whitmore always seemed to gather the way a lamp gathers moths. "She's correcting a bookplate. Did you hear that? At Eleanor Winthrop's table, with hands like a chimney sweep's." He leaned down close to her, and his smile was the cruelest thing in the room. "Let me see them. Come, show us. Show the company your pretty hands." "I'd rather finish my work, sir." "I asked to see your hands." Ethan had set his glass down. He did not remember doing it. Nathaniel. The Winthrops' hostess, Eleanor, appeared at the edge of the little circle, her face tight with the panic of a woman watching her party curdle. "Nathaniel, leave the girl be. She's only—" "I'm making conversation, Eleanor. Am I not permitted to make conversation?" He straightened and addressed the room, now the whole widening ring of faces that had turned toward the corner like flowers toward a fire. "Here is a lesson, ladies and gentlemen, in what happens when we forget our stations. This creature— What's your name, girl?" "Silence. Your name." "Abigail Harper." "Harper. Harper." He tasted it like a bad wine. "The scholar's daughter. The penniless scholar's daughter. Yes, I recall the father. Died owing every bookseller in Boston, didn't he? And left this behind to inherit his debts and his dirt." He laughed, and a few around him laughed with him, the way men laugh at what frightens them a little. "Tell me, Miss Harper, does Winthrop pay you in coin or in the privilege of breathing the same air as your betters?" And here Ethan would remember this for the rest of his life. Here she should have wept, or fled, or begged. Every woman he had ever seen cornered like this had done one of the three. Abigail Harper did none of them. She picked her pen back up. "He pays me in coin, sir," she said, dipping the nib, "same as your tailor. Though I expect I'm cheaper, and I don't gossip." For one full second, the corner of the room went utterly silent. Then somebody laughed, a real laugh, startled out of a young man near the back, and Whitmore's face changed, and Ethan understood that the thing had just gone from cruel to dangerous. "You will not," Whitmore said very low now, "speak to me in that manner." "I spoke to you civilly, sir. You asked a question, and I answered it. You are a servant. I am an archivist." She said it plainly, without heat, a person correcting a fact. "And I am correcting your uncle's bookplate, Mr. Whitmore, because the engraver put the family motto in false Latin, and it has been wrong in your family's books for 11 years, and no one in your house reads well enough to have noticed." The silence this time had teeth. Whitmore's hand came down flat on the table, hard enough to jump the inkwell. "Give me that." "Sir." "Give it here." And he snatched the page out from under her hand, tearing the corner where her fingers had pinned it, holding it up over her head as she came half out of her chair. "Let's all have a look at the great scholar's correction, shall we? Let's see what wisdom the chimney sweep has for the house of Whitmore." "Give it back." Her voice cracked for the first time, not with fear Ethan saw, but with something fiercer. "You'll tear it. That's 40 years old, you'll tear it. Then reach for it. Go on, reach for it, girl, and let the whole room watch you." He never finished the sentence, because Ethan Caldwell was already crossing the room. He did not hurry. That was the thing people spoke of afterward in the days and weeks that followed, when the story of that night traveled from parlor to parlor across Beacon Hill, that Ethan Caldwell had not hurried. He had crossed the entire length of the Winthrops' great room, at the unhurried pace of a man walking out to check on his horse, and the crowd had opened before him, the way it always did, and every conversation he passed had died in the throat of whoever was having it, so that by the time he reached the corner, the whole enormous room had gone quiet enough to hear the candles hiss. He stopped an arm's length from Whitmore. "Give the lady her page back, Nathaniel." Whitmore blinked at him. "Caldwell, this is no affair of yours." "Give her the page." "She's a servant, Caldwell, she—" "You've said that, twice now. You keep saying it like it settles something." Ethan's voice was almost pleasant, which was worse than if it had not been. "It doesn't. Give her the page." For a moment Whitmore held it high and stubborn, and the two men looked at each other, and the room did not breathe. Then Whitmore, with a small, ugly laugh, tossed the page down onto the table. "There, God's sake. It's only paper." "It's a 40-year-old book plate," Ethan said, "and you tore it and it wasn't yours to touch." He did not look at it. He was looking at her now, at Abigail Harper, who had gone very still in her chair, with her ink-black fingers spread flat and protective over the torn corner. Her chin up, her eyes bright and hard and fixed on his face with an expression he could not read, and would spend a good part of his life trying to. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" The question seemed to surprise her more than anything Whitmore had done. "No." "Then I'm sorry to have made a scene of it. But I couldn't sit and watch it." "I didn't ask you to." "No," Ethan agreed. "You didn't. You were doing fine on your own from what I heard. The Latin especially." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "In veritate Victoria. He had it wrong, I take it." She stared at him. "You read the plate." From across the room, "No, ma'am. My eyes aren't that good. But I know that motto, and I know it's wrong in half the houses in Boston, because the engraver on Cornhill botched a whole run of them in the year 6, and every family too proud to check has been walking around with bad grammar carved into their books ever since." He tipped his head slightly. "You're the first person I've met who caught it." And here Whitmore, who could not bear to be forgotten in any room for longer than a moment, stepped back into it. "How touching," he said. "The wealthiest man in Massachusetts, defending the honor of a cataloger. Tell me, Caldwell, is this a new charity of yours? Are we to expect you at the almshouse next, teaching the paupers their letters?" "Nathaniel." Eleanor Winthrop again, desperate now. "Please." "No, let him," Ethan said. "Let him finish. He's building to something. He always is." He turned fully toward Whitmore for the first time, and the pleasantness had drained clean out of him, and what was left underneath was flat and cold and very calm. "Go on. What's the joke? Say it out where everyone can hear it the way you like." "The joke," Whitmore said, though his voice had lost some of its carrying confidence now, "is that a man of your standing has forgotten what standing means. You cross a room full of the finest families in the Commonwealth, you insult 4 of them, I'm told, before the dancing's even begun, and then you cross the whole floor for a girl who scrubs ink off other people's shelves. It's absurd, Caldwell. It makes a mockery of everyone here." "Does it?" "It does. It says their names, their blood, their fortunes. It says all of it is worth no more to you than hers." Ethan let that sit in the air a moment. "Well," he said quietly. "Yes." The word landed in the silent room like a stone in a still pond. "Yes," he said again, louder now, so it carried, because he found suddenly that he wanted it to carry. Wanted every powdered, pearled, self-satisfied face in that room to hear it clean. "That's exactly what it says. I've stood in this room an hour and been introduced to 4 young women whose only accomplishment is the size of their fathers' warehouses, and I said no to every one, and no one called that absurd. But this woman—" He did not point. He did not need to. The whole room's eyes were already on her. This woman looked at a page that's been wrong for 11 years, that 100 educated men have handled, and not one of them noticed, and she made it right, because she couldn't stand to leave a true thing false. And you'd have me believe the accident of her birth makes her worth less than a warehouse. He shook his head slowly. "No, Nathaniel, I don't believe it. And I'll tell you plain what I do believe, since we're saying things out loud tonight." The room waited. Abigail Harper had not moved. "Why?" Ethan said. "Does intelligence need permission to exist in this room?" Nobody answered him. Nobody could. That's the question, isn't it? That's the whole of it. Every one of you would trip over your own feet to shake the hand of a fool with the right grandfather. And you'd sooner she vanished through that servant's door than admit that the sharpest mind in the house tonight has ink on its hands and no money to its name. He let his gaze travel the ring of faces slow, and one by one they dropped their eyes from his. I'm not a good man. Ask anyone. I lend at hard rates, and I don't dance, and I've made more enemies than friends, and I'll die having made more. But I'll be damned before I stand in a room and watch its finest people mock the one honest thing in it. Miss Harper. She startled at her name. Sir? I believe your page is finished, or near enough. Might I see you back to the library, so you're not made to cross this floor alone twice in one night? For a long moment, she only looked at him and Ethan Caldwell, who had faced down creditors and shipmasters, and his own iron father without flinching, found that he was holding his breath. I don't need seeing to Mr. Caldwell, she said at last. No, ma'am. I don't doubt it. But... She gathered the torn page with a care that made his chest ache, sliding it between two clean sheets to protect the corner, and she rose, and she was smaller standing than he'd expected, and somehow larger too. I'll allow it, on one condition. Name it. You'll not do this again. This... She made a small gesture that took in the room, the silence, the 100 watching eyes. This rescuing. I've been in worse rooms than this one and gotten myself out of every one, and I don't intend to spend my life grateful to a man for doing what any decent person ought. If we're to speak again, and I don't know that we shall, you'll speak to me as though I fixed your Latin, not as though you saved my life. Is that understood? And Ethan Caldwell, who had said no 4 times that night, who said no to nearly everything and everyone as a matter of principle and pleasure, both heard himself say, yes, ma'am, understood. Then you may see me to the door. They did not speak until they were through the servants' door and into the narrow back hall, away from the eyes, and it was Abigail who broke the silence, and she did not thank him. That was foolish, she said. Likely. No, I mean it, Mr. Caldwell, truly foolish. You've made an enemy of Nathaniel Whitmore tonight in front of everyone he most wants to impress, and men like Whitmore don't forgive being made small. He'll come after you. He can try. He'll come after me. She stopped walking and turned to face him, and there was no fear in it, only a plain and weary knowledge. I'm the one he can reach. You he can't touch. You've too much money and too little shame. But me? I hold my position by Mr. Winthrop's goodwill and nothing else. And Winthrop bends whichever way the wind of this town blows. And tonight, you've turned that wind. She let out a breath. So no, don't tell me it was fine. It wasn't fine. It felt fine. I'll grant you that. It's the first time in 3 years anyone in that room has spoken as though I were a person. But feelings and consequences aren't the same animal, and I've learned to tell them apart. Ethan was quiet a moment. You're right, he said. I know I'm right. I mean it. You're right, and I didn't think it through because I don't think I act. It's a failing my father's remarked on my whole life, and tonight it may have cost you. He set his jaw. So let me undo the harm then in the only way I know how, which is money and a name, since those are the 2 things I've got that Whitmore respects. Come and work for me. She blinked. What? My family's library, the Caldwell collection. He said it carefully now, watching her. It's considerable. My grandfather bought books the way other men buy land, and my father added to it out of vanity, and neither of them ever read a page, and it sat for 30 years half in crates and half in ruin, with no one who understands it. It needs cataloging. It needs saving. If I'm honest, there's water damage, there's rot, there's things in there worth more than this whole house, and no one alive who knows which. I've asked 3 men to take it on, and all 3 took one look and quit inside a month. I need someone who won't quit. Someone who can't stand to leave a true thing false. Abigail Harper looked at him for a long, long moment. You're offering me a position. she said slowly. In the house of the man everyone in that room is about to whisper you crossed a ballroom for. You understand what that will look like. I understand exactly what it'll look like. And you'd have me trade Winthrop's roof, which is shaky, I'll grant. But it's mine. I earned it for a roof that comes with your name attached to it. And your name is about to be the most talked about thing in Boston. When you put it that way, it sounds a poor bargain. It is a poor bargain. But she said it slowly, and Ethan saw something behind her eyes that had nothing to do with the bargain and everything to do with the word he had said, saving. Not saving her, saving the books. How bad is the damage? Bad. How bad, Mr. Caldwell? I'll not answer you on a bad. I've heard rich men call a torn dust jacket a tragedy. There's a shelf of incunabula in the north room that's been sitting under a leak since before I was born, Ethan said, and I don't know what half of it is, and every year I mean to see to it, and every year I don't, and every year I think about the fact that things printed before Columbus sailed are rotting in my house because I'm too ignorant to know what I've got and too proud to admit it. That bad. He watched the word incunabula go into her like a hook into a fish. She hated that it worked. He could see her hating it, and he could see, too, that it had worked. I'll look at it, she said finally. That's all. I'll come and look, I make no promise past that. And I'll not have you telling anyone I've agreed to a thing until I've seen the state of it with my own eyes and named my own terms. Do we understand each other? We do, ma'am, and the other matter stands. You'll not treat me as a thing you rescued. I've had a lifetime of men deciding what's best for me, and I've buried better men than you who tried it. Understood. Then, she drew herself up, tucked the protected page beneath her arm, and looked at him with those bright, unforgiving eyes. Good night, Mr. Caldwell. Thank you for the trouble. And for what it's worth. A small pause. The first hesitation he'd seen in her all night. It was a kind thing you did, even if it was a fool thing. I'll allow it was both. She turned to go. Miss Harper? She stopped half-turned, waiting. And here, Ethan Caldwell did the thing he had come to that gala to do, though he had not admitted it to himself until this exact moment, standing in a servants' hall, with ink smell in the air, and his heart doing something in his chest it had not done in years. I didn't cross that room by accident, he said quietly. I know. I heard your speech. You crossed it for principle, you said, for truth. That's not the whole of it. He reached into his coat and drew out a small folded paper, worn soft at the creases from handling, and held it out to her. I've been carrying this the better part of a year. I didn't know I'd meet you tonight. I'd have come regardless. Winthrop made me. But when Josiah said the Harper girl cataloged the collection, here, look at it. Then tell me I crossed the room for a stranger. She took it frowning and unfolded it, and Ethan watched her face as she read. It was a single leaf, torn carefully, cleanly torn from the end paper of a book. And on it, in a small exact hand, was a correction. A note in the margin of a catalog entry, pointing out that a volume long attributed to one author was in truth the work of another, with 3 lines of reasoning so precise, so quietly certain, that the anonymous scholar who wrote it had settled in 3 sentences a question that had vexed better-known men for a generation. The hand was hers. She knew it the instant she saw it. He watched her know it. This is mine, she whispered. This is where did you... It was in a book my father bought at the Winthrop estate sale 2 years back, when old Winthrop's father died, and they sold off a wing of the library to pay the taxes. Your notes were all through it, dozens of them in the margins in the end papers, and I read every one, and I sat in my cold house with no one to talk to, and I read the notes of some scholar I'd never met, some mind sharper and truer than anyone I knew, and I thought... He stopped. Started again, rougher. I thought, there is one honest person left in this town, and I don't even know their name. And I asked. For a year I asked, and no one knew, because no one had ever thought to notice the person doing the noticing. He met her eyes. And then tonight, a man across the room said, the Harper girl catalogs the collection, and I looked, And there you were fixing a false thing in a room full of false people. And I knew before I'd crossed 10 feet of floor exactly who you were. Abigail Harper stood very still in the narrow hall, holding a torn leaf of her own handwriting in her ink-stained fingers, and for the first time that whole cruel night, her chin was not quite steady. "You read my notes," she said. "Every one." "For a year. Longer, maybe. I lost track. I don't do things by halves, Miss Harper. It's the other failing my father remarks on." He tried for lightness and did not quite reach it. "So when I ask you to come and see the library, understand I'm not offering charity, and I'm not rescuing anyone, and I'm not saying yes to you because you're poor and clever and had a hard night. I'm asking because for the better part of a year, the only conversation worth having in this whole town has been the one I was having with a stranger's handwriting, and I would very much like just once to have it out loud." The candle at the end of the hall guttered. Somewhere behind the door, the gala had picked itself back up. The music had started again, the voices, the whole gilded machine grinding back into motion now that its brief interruption had removed itself from view. Abigail folded the leaf slowly along its worn creases. She did not give it back. "May I keep this?" she asked. "It's yours. It always was." Then she tucked it in beside the bookplate, the true thing and the mended thing together beneath her arm. And she looked up at him, and there was something new in her face now, wary, still guarded, still but underneath it. Unmistakably, the first faint light of a person who has spent her whole life speaking into silence, and just heard for the first time an answer come back. "Tuesday," she said. "I'll come Tuesday in the morning to look, not before. And you'll have coffee ready, Mr. Caldwell, because if that library's half as bad as you say, I'll be there past dark, and I don't work hungry." "Tuesday," Ethan said. "Coffee. Understood. Good night, then." "Good night, Miss Harper." She walked away down the narrow hall, unhurried. Her ink-stained fingers curved protectively over the papers beneath her arm. And she did not look back. And Ethan Caldwell stood alone in the servants' passage of a house full of people who despised him, with the music of the gala rising behind the door, and his father's disapproval waiting for him somewhere out in the bright, cruel room. He'd have to walk back through, and he found that for the first time in longer than he could remember, he did not mind the walk at all. He had crossed a room that night. Everyone would say so for weeks. The wealthiest man in Massachusetts crossing a ballroom for a cataloger with ink on her hands. They would all have it wrong. He had not crossed it to rescue her. He had crossed it because a true thing had been sitting in the corner of a false room for 3 years waiting to be seen. And Ethan Caldwell had spent his whole hard, lonely, unforgiving life learning that when you finally find the one true thing in a world of counterfeit, you do not sit still, and you do not wait for permission. And you do not let a single cruel man with a fine grandfather tear it in half in front of you. You get up, and you walk toward it. Tuesday came, and Abigail Harper stood on the front step of the Caldwell house at 7 in the morning, and knocked and waited, and told herself for the 3rd time that she was here for the incunabula and nothing else. She almost believed it. The door opened, and it was not a footman. It was Ethan Caldwell himself, in his shirt sleeves, with his cuffs turned back, and actual ink, on his own right hand. And he looked at her with the faint surprise of a man who had half expected her not to come. "You're early," he said. "I said morning. This is morning." "Most people mean 10 when they say morning." "Then most people are lazy, Mr. Caldwell, and I'm not most people, and if you've dragged me across town at this hour to stand on your step and discuss the hour, I'll turn round and go home." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "The coffee's on. You said coffee." "I did say coffee." She stepped past him into the hall and stopped because the smell hit her first before she saw anything. Before her eyes had even adjusted, she smelled it, and it stopped her cold. Old paper, damp, rot. The particular sweet-sour breath of leather gone soft and pages gone brown, and underneath it faint and terrible the smell of mold. Her whole body went still the way a doctor's does at the door of a sick room. "How bad?" she said, and it wasn't a question anymore. "I told you, bad." "Show me, now, coffee after." The library took up the entire north wing, and Abigail stood in the doorway of it and did not speak for a full minute, and Ethan had the good sense not to fill the silence. It was worse than he had said. That was her first thought. Rich men always exaggerated their troubles. She'd learned that at Winthrop's, where a stain on a spine could bring on a fit of the vapors, but Ethan Caldwell had done the opposite. He had understated it. There were crates, dozens of them, stacked to the ceiling, and half of them burst open. There were shelves that had bowed under their own weight and spilled their contents into heaps. There was a water stain on the north wall, the color of old blood, spreading down from a ceiling that had plainly been leaking for a generation, and beneath it, she crossed the room without a word. She was moving before she decided to move. Miss Harper. Quiet. She dropped to her knees in front of the ruined shelf beneath the stain, and her hands, those ink-stained, unbeautiful, capable hands, went out and hovered over the books without touching the way you'd hold your palms over a fevered child. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, you fool. You said a year. You said the leak's been a year." "I said before I was born. Then why is this wet?" She turned and looked up at him, and her face had gone white with fury. "This is fresh, Mr. Caldwell. This isn't old damage settling. Something is leaking right now this week, this month. Feel it. It's damp to the touch, the mold's still growing. You have a live leak, and you've been letting it run over books that were printed while Gutenberg's press was still warm." She stood, and she was shaking, and it was not fear. "Where does the water come from? What's above this room?" I don't know. A gutter, I think. There's a... You think?" She was already moving, pulling the topmost crate down, careless of her dress, checking the ones behind. "You've a treasure in here worth more than your ships, and you don't know what's above the room it's dying in. God above. Get me a ladder, get me clean linen, get me every dry blanket in this house, and get someone up on that roof before noon. Or I promise you, Mr. Caldwell, by winter, you'll own the most expensive pile of mold in the Commonwealth." He stared at her. "Why are you standing there? Go!" And Ethan Caldwell, who had not taken an order from any living soul since his mother died, went. By noon, there was a man on the roof. By 1, the leak was found a cracked gutter, exactly as she'd said, funneling 3 years of rain straight down the inside of the north wall. By 2, Abigail had every window in the wing thrown open and every damp book laid out flat on clean linen across the long tables, and she moved among them like a field surgeon after a battle. And Ethan stood in the doorway watching her work and did not offer to help because she had told him flatly that he'd do more harm than good and should stay out of her light. He came back at 3 with the coffee. "You forgot this," he said. She didn't look up. "I didn't forget it. I was busy saving your grandfather's mistakes. Sit down a minute. You've been on your feet 6 hours. There's a Boethius here, I think is a 1470, and it's got water 2 pages deep, and I don't have a minute. Mr. Caldwell, the Boethius has waited 3 years. It'll wait while you drink coffee." He set the cup down on the one clear corner of the table, and after a pause added quietly, "Please." Something in the please made her stop. She straightened and pressed the back of her wrist to her forehead, and only then seemed to notice how tired she was, how her back ached and her hands had gone stiff. She took the coffee. She drank it standing up because she would not sit, but she drank it. "You've a good eye," he said, "for the leak. 3 men I hired and not one of them looked up. 3 men you hired looked at the books. Books are the symptom. I look at what's killing them." She drank again. "It's the same with people if you've ever noticed. Everyone stares at the person bleeding, and no one looks for the knife. That's a hard way to see the world. It's an accurate way. The two aren't opposites." She set the cup down half-finished and turned back toward the tables, but she didn't pick up the next book. She stood a moment, her back to him, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. "My father died in a room that smelled like this one." Ethan went still. He wouldn't sell his books, even at the end. Even when the doctor wanted paying and the landlord wanted paying, and there was nothing left to sell but the books, he wouldn't. He said a man who sells his library sells his mind, and he'd rather starve with a whole mind than eat with half a one. She let out a breath that was not quite a laugh. So we starved a little. And he kept his mind. And when he died, the creditors came and took every volume anyway. And I stood in the doorway and watched strangers carry my father out one door and his whole life out the other, and I couldn't stop either one. She turned around. Her eyes were dry, but only just. So when you show me a room full of dying books and tell me you've let them rot because you were too proud to admit you didn't understand them, you'll forgive me, Mr. Caldwell, if I don't have much patience for your pride. The room was very quiet. I didn't know, Ethan said. Of course you didn't. Why would you? You never asked. Nobody ever asks. She picked up the Wealthiest gently and cradled it. That's the whole trouble with your world if you want the truth of it. You've all got so much you've forgotten how to want, and I've had so little I can't afford to forget for a minute. So I'll fix your library, Mr. Caldwell, and I'll save what can be saved, and I'll do it because these books never did anything to deserve dying in the dark. But don't mistake it for gratitude. I'm not grateful. I'm just the only one who came who couldn't stand to watch. She carried the Boethius to the driest table and laid it down and bent over it, and that was the end of the conversation, and Ethan Caldwell went and stood by the window and looked out at nothing, and understood with a slow, cold certainty that he had spent his whole life being handed things, and this woman had spent hers watching things be taken, and that the distance between those two facts was the widest thing he had ever tried to see across. She came back the next day. She had named no terms. She'd simply come. And the day after. By the end of the week, she had a system, and by the end of the second week, she had a name for every crate, and a fate for every book, and the north wing no longer smelled of death, but of beeswax and clean linen, and the particular dry, warm smell of paper that has been rescued in time. Ethan took to coming in the mornings with the coffee. He learned not to touch anything. He learned to sit on the one stool she permitted him and watch, and to be quiet and slowly, in the gaps between her work to talk. That one, he said one morning, nodding at a small dark book she'd set apart. You keep coming back to it. 3 days now. What is it? I don't know yet. That's why I keep coming back. She didn't look up. It's got no title page and no colophon, and a binding that doesn't match the paper, which means it was rebound. Which means somebody at some point cared enough to save it, which means it's worth something to somebody. And I want to know who and why before I decide what it is. Could you not just read it? Find out what it says. She did look up at that, and there was something almost pitying in it. Mr. Caldwell, do you think a book is only what it says? Isn't it? No. She set down her pen. She seemed to decide something. Come here. No, come here. I'll not shout across the room. Sit. Look. She turned the little book toward him and opened it with a care that was almost tenderness. What do you see, Walter? Words. Latin. I don't. Not the words. Look at the page. Look at the margin. She pointed, not touching. See that someone's written there. 200 years ago, maybe more, someone sat with this exact book, this exact page, and had a thought, and couldn't keep it in, and wrote it down here in the margin where the printer left room. And here see a different hand later arguing back, and here a third later still. Her voice had gone soft and urgent, the voice of someone showing you the thing they love most in the world. That's what a book is, Mr. Caldwell. It's not the words. Anyone can print words. It's everyone who ever touched it. It's the argument that's been going on across 300 years in these margins, one dead reader answering another, none of them ever meeting, all of them still talking. Your grandfather bought the words. He never once heard the argument. And that? She closed the book. Gently. That is the difference between owning a library and having one. Ethan sat very still. Say that again, he said. Which part? The argument. Across 300 years, nobody ever meeting. She frowned. Why? Because that's... He stopped, started again. You wrote notes in the margins of a book I found, a year ago. and I read them and I answered them in my head, and you never knew, and we never met, and I—" He looked at her. "I was in the argument. I was one of the hands in the margin. I just didn't know the word for it until right now." Abigail Harper looked back at him, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the whole enormous house was silent around them, and something passed between them that had no name and needed none. Then she stood up briskly and gathered her skirts and said, "The coffee's gone cold," in a voice that was not quite steady, and the moment closed like a book, but it did not go away. Ethan felt it there for the rest of the day, under everything the way you feel a change in the weather before the sky shows it. He should have known Whitmore would not let it lie. The letter came on a Thursday 3 weeks in. Not to Ethan but to his father, and Ethan learned of it the way he learned of most things his father did, which was by being summoned. Cornelius Caldwell received his son in the study, standing, which was never a good sign, and he did not offer him a chair, which was worse. "There is talk," Cornelius said. "There is always talk. It's the only thing this town manufactures anymore. Don't be clever with me, Ethan. There is talk that you've installed a woman in the north wing, a servant, a Harper, that dead pedant's daughter, the one you made a scene over at Winthrop's." His father's face was carved from the same cold stone as always, but there was something new working underneath it, and Ethan realized with a small shock that it was fear. "Nathaniel Whitmore called on me, personally, to express his concern." Whitmore's concern is worth about as much as his father's concern. Ethan is worth a great deal, and his father sits on the bank's board, and this family's paper is held by that bank, and if you think the accident of our name protects us from the judgment of men like Whitmore, you are a greater fool than your mother's people ever were. Cornelius came around the desk. "Send the girl back to Winthrop. Today. Pay her off if you must. And then present yourself at the Amberley reception on Saturday, and stand up with the Amberley girl for 2 dances where the whole town can see you, and we will let this—" He waved a hand. "This episode be forgotten." Ethan was quiet a moment. "No," he said. "I beg your pardon. You heard me. No, she's not going back. She's saving $30,000 of books you didn't know you owned, and doing it for wages that would shame a scullery maid. And she's the only honest person to set foot in this house since Mother died. And I'll not send her back to Winthrop so that Nathaniel Whitmore can sleep easy." He met his father's eyes. "Cut me off if you like. You've threatened it my whole life. Do it or don't, but stop using it. Because I'm 34 years old and I'm tired of dancing to it." For a long moment, his father simply looked at him. "You think this is about the books," Cornelius said finally, and his voice had gone quiet, and quiet from his father was the most dangerous thing of all. "You always did mistake stubbornness for principle. Let me tell you what this is about, since you insist on being a child about it. It's about the fact that Nathaniel Whitmore wanted that girl for himself." Ethan went still. "Oh yes. Didn't you know he'd made inquiries? Before your little scene. He'd have taken her as a well. Not a wife, one doesn't marry a Harper. But he'd have set her up, kept her, and she'd have been grateful, because that is what her sort does. They trade the only thing they have for a roof and a name to hide behind." Cornelius watched his son's face with something like cruel satisfaction. "And then you crossed the ballroom and made her the most talked-about woman in Boston, and put her clean out of his reach and humiliated him, besides in front of everyone whose opinion he trades on. So no, Ethan. This isn't about your books. This is about a man you shamed who cannot reach you, looking for the softest place to put the knife. And you have handed him that place. You have moved it into your own north wing." He turned away. "Send her back, for her sake if not for yours. Because I promise you the harm that comes of this will not fall on the Caldwell name. It never does. It will fall on her." And Ethan Caldwell stood in his father's study and felt the ground move under him, because the old man was right, and he knew it, and worst of all, Abigail had said the exact same thing that first night in the servants' hall. "He'll come after me. I'm the one he can reach." He had told himself she was wrong. She had not been wrong. She was never wrong. That was the whole trouble with her. He did not send her back. He could not have made himself do it if his life depended on it. But he did the next thing, which was worse, because he tried to protect her without telling her. And Abigail Harper was the last woman in the Commonwealth who would forgive being protected without being told. He wrote to Winthrop and quietly guaranteed her position there so she'd have somewhere to return to if the Caldwell house became untenable. He instructed his steward to double her wages and to say nothing of where the increase came from. He let it be known, in the careful sideways way, that news traveled in that town that Miss Harper was under his family's protection, meaning it as a shield, forgetting that in the mouths of men like Whitmore, the word protection had another meaning entirely, an ugly one, the kind that confirmed every filthy thing they already wanted to believe. He found out his mistake on a Monday. She came in late the first time she'd ever come in late, and she did not go to the tables. She came and stood in front of his stool, and she had a letter in her hand, and her face was a thing he'd never seen on her, white and rigid. And when she spoke, her voice was terribly, terribly calm. "Did you tell people I was under your protection?" Ethan felt the floor tilt. Did you?" "Abigail. Miss Harper, you'll call me Miss Harper. We were never—" She stopped, breathed, started again, and the calm was worse than shouting. "There is a letter going round Boston. I've had 3 people show it to me this morning on my way here, 3 before 9 o'clock, all of them delighted to be the one to bring me the news. It says that Ethan Caldwell has taken the Harper girl into his house, under his protection." She let the word fall like a stone. "Do you know what that word means, Mr. Caldwell, when a rich man says it about a poor woman he's installed in his home? Do you have the faintest idea? Because I promise you every soul in this town does, and this morning every one of them looked at me and thought it, and I will never be able to look at any of them again without knowing they thought it." I know what you meant. That's what makes it unbearable. You meant to help. You always mean to help. And every time you help I lose something and you lose nothing and you don't even see it because you've never once in your life lost anything you couldn't buy back. Her hands were shaking. "I had a reputation, Mr. Caldwell. It was all I had. A poor woman has exactly one thing that's hers and can't be taken by creditors, and it's her name. And I kept mine spotless for 23 years in a world that wanted to dirty it, and you—" Her voice cracked finally, and she hated it. He could see her hating it. "You dirtied it in an afternoon, with a kindness. And now Whitmore has what he wanted all along, because it doesn't matter anymore whether it's true. It's said. And in this town, said is true." Then let me— "No." She stepped back from him. "No. That's the sentence I never want to hear from you again. Let me fix it. Let me protect you. Let me cross the room. Let me. I don't want to be. Let anything. I want to be asked. I want to be treated as a person who might have a better idea than you about her own life, because I always do. Mr. Caldwell, I always do. And you never listen because you've decided that caring about someone means deciding things for them." She was crying now and furious about it. "And the terrible thing is that I'd started to—" She stopped. The room hung on the edge of what she'd almost said. "You'd started to what?" Ethan said very low. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me. You'd started to what, Abigail?" And she looked at him, and there was no calm left in her at all now, only the raw thing underneath, and she said, "I'd started to trust you. God help me. After a lifetime of learning better. I'd started to think that maybe here was one man who saw me and not a use for me, and I let my guard down 1 inch for the first time in years, and this is what came through the gap. So no, you don't get to fix it. You don't get to cross another room. You've done enough crossing. What I need from you now, Mr. Caldwell, is for you to stand still for once in your life and let me think." She turned and walked to the far end of the wing to the window, and she stood there with her back to him, and her arms wrapped around herself, and Ethan Caldwell sat on his stool in the ruins of his grandfather's library and did the single hardest thing he had ever done, which was nothing at all. He let her stand in the window for an hour. He did not go to her. It cost him something he didn't have a name for, But he did it because she had asked, and because for the first time he understood that giving her what she asked for was the only apology he had that was worth anything. When she finally spoke, she didn't turn around. "There's a way to fix it," she said. "Not your way, mine. Tell me. The letter says, 'I'm your kept woman.' The only thing that makes that letter true is if I behave like a woman with something to hide, if I slink off or take your money quietly, or let you set me up somewhere out of sight. That's what Whitmore's counting on. He's counting on shame doing his work for him the way it always does." She turned now, and her face was dry again and set, and there was a light in it he'd learned to be a little afraid of. "So we do the opposite. We make it impossible for the letter to be true. You don't hide me. You put me in the light. You make me not your secret, but you're your colleague, your equal, in public, where they can't pretend not to see." How? The Athenaeum. She said it like a general naming a battlefield. The Boston Athenaeum has been trying for 2 years to catalog the Perkins bequest, and can't because it's a disaster, and every man they've hired has failed because they're fools who care more about their fee than the books. I know this because everyone in my trade knows it. It's the great unsolvable job, the one that ended 3 reputations. She lifted her chin. "You have money and a name and a seat on half the boards in this town, whether you attend them or not. Get me that job. Not quietly, loudly. Nominate me, a woman, a Harper, for the most public scholarly post in Boston. Make them say no to my face if they're going to say it in the light where everyone can see exactly what they're refusing and why." Ethan stared at her. "They'll never allow it. A woman at the Athenaeum, they'll be forced to argue about it." Her eyes were burning now. "Don't you see? Right now the argument is private. And in private, I lose. Because in private, it's just a rich man and a poor woman, and everyone knows how that ends. But if you drag it into the open, if you make them debate out loud in front of the whole town whether the best archivist in Boston should be denied the work she's plainly the best at, purely because she's a woman with no money, then it's not my reputation on trial anymore, Mr. Caldwell. It's theirs." She almost smiled, and it was fierce. "Whitmore wants to make this about whether I'm respectable. Fine. Let's make it about whether Boston is. Let's make the whole town look at itself in the glass." For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. "You've thought this through," he managed. "I've had an hour at your window. I think fast when I'm angry." She crossed back toward him and stopped in front of the stool and looked down at him, and the fierceness gave way just for a moment to something more honest and more frightening. "But understand what I'm asking, because I want you to say yes to the true thing and not the pretty one. If we do this and it fails, if they refuse me, and they might then, I don't just lose Winthrop's roof. I lose my whole trade. No collection in New England will hire the woman who reached above her station and got slapped down in public. I'll have nothing. Not a position, not a name, not even the small, quiet life I had before you crossed that room. Everything. I'm asking you to help me gamble everything on the chance that this town has one more ounce of shame left in it than I think it does." "And if it works," she was quiet a moment. "If it works," she said, "then no man alive can ever again say I hold my place by your favor, because I'll have earned it in the one arena you can't buy. And that letter Whitmore wrote will turn to ash in his hand because you can't keep a woman the whole town's just watched become somebody. Kept women don't get named to the Athenaeum. It'll unmake his lie by making me true." She held his gaze. "That's the wager. My whole life on one throw. So don't say yes to be kind, Mr. Caldwell. Don't say yes because you feel guilty about the letter. You should feel guilty, but that's not a reason. Say yes only if you believe I can actually do it. Because if you don't believe it all the way down, then you'll flinch when it gets hard, and you'll try to let me something and you'll ruin it. So I need to know." She took a breath. "Do you believe I can do it?" And Ethan Caldwell looked up at Abigail Harper, at the ink on her hands, and the fury in her eyes, and the whole fierce, ungovernable mind of her standing in his ruined library, having just in the space of 1 hour of quiet rage designed a campaign that could either save her or destroy her. And he did not hesitate. "I believe," he said, "that you're the most formidable person I've ever met, and that if the Athenaeum has any sense left, it'll thank God you're willing to fix its books, and that if it doesn't, then it deserves to lose you, and Boston deserves to watch it happen." He stood up off the stool so that they were level. "Yes, all of it, loudly. And I won't flinch, and I won't try to let you anything. And when they fight, and they will fight, I'll stand where you tell me to stand and nowhere else. You have my word." He paused. "On one condition of my own." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't get conditions. You lost conditions with the letter." "One, just one." "What?" "When it works," Ethan said, "and I say when not if you'll let me be there. In the room. Not to protect you, not to speak for you, just to watch. Because I've spent a year and a month reading the notes of a mind I thought I'd never get to see at work. And if you're about to walk into the Athenaeum and remake this whole town in an afternoon, then Abigail Harper, I have earned the right to be standing in the back of the room when you do it." For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then something in her face gave not the guard, not all the way, but a crack in it, a real one, the first she'd let him see on purpose. "You may watch," she said, "from the back, and you'll say nothing, not one word, no matter what they say to me." "Not one word." "Swear it." "On my mother's grave." She studied him a moment longer, as if weighing the whole of him, the crossing, and the letter, and the year of reading her notes, and the hour he'd let her stand at the window without coming near. And then she put out her hand, her right hand, the ink-stained one, the one Whitmore had demanded she hide, and she held it out to him plainly, palm up, the way one scholar offers to another, the way no fine lady in Boston would ever have offered a hand to any man. "Then we have a bargain, Mr. Caldwell," she said. "God help us both." He took her hand. It was warm and stained and stronger than he'd expected, and when she gripped his, she did it hard. The grip of someone who had just decided to stop being careful, and Ethan Caldwell held on and felt the whole of his safe, cold, purposeless life fall away behind him like a coat he'd finally set down. "God help us both," he said. And somewhere across the city, in a fine house on Beacon Hill, Nathaniel Whitmore was folding a second letter and smiling, and did not yet know that the poor woman he'd meant to shame into the shadows was about to walk straight into the brightest room in Boston and dare the whole town to look away. The nomination went in on a Friday, and by Monday the whole of Boston was talking about nothing else. Ethan had done it exactly as she'd told him loudly in writing, to the full board of the Athenaeum, with his name attached and no attempt at softness. He had proposed that Miss Abigail Harper be engaged to catalog the Perkins bequest, the great unsolvable job that had broken 3 men, and he had said plainly in his letter that she was the finest archivist in New England, and that the only argument against her was one no honest man would say out loud. Then he'd sent a copy of the letter to 4 people he knew could not keep a secret, so that by Sunday it had been read aloud in 3 parlors and denounced in 2. "You sent copies," Abigail said when she found out. "You didn't tell me you'd send copies." "You told me loudly. Copies is loudly. Copies is—" She stopped, and something almost like respect crossed her face. "Copies is cleverer than I gave you credit for. They can refuse me in a private meeting, and no one's the wiser. They can't unread a letter that's already been round every drawing room on the Hill." She looked at him a moment. "You're learning, Mr. Caldwell. I had a good teacher, hard but good." "I'm not hard. I'm accurate. We've been over this." But she almost smiled when she said it, and Ethan counted that a victory, and did not say so, because he was learning that too. The board met on the following Thursday to consider the nomination, and Abigail was not invited because women were not invited to the boardroom of the Boston Athenaeum, and that it turned out was the first mistake the board made, because she went anyway. She did not force her way in. She did something worse. She arrived an hour early and seated herself in the public reading room directly outside the board's chamber at the long central table, and she laid out before her in plain view of every member as he arrived a portion of the Perkins bequest itself. She had asked the librarian, a nervous young man named Pratt, who owed her a favor from her Winthrop days to bring her a single crate of the disputed collection. And now she sat in the most public room in the building in the light of the great windows, methodically doing the exact work the board was about to meet and decide whether she was fit to do. Ethan stood at the back as promised and said nothing as sworn and watched her set the trap. The board members came in one by one. Each of them saw her. Each of them saw what she was doing. And each of them had to walk past her, past the ink-stained woman, calmly expertly solving in public the problem their institution had failed to solve in 2 years, to reach the room where they were going to argue that she couldn't. The last to arrive was Nathaniel Whitmore. He was not a board member, but his father was and had sent him in his stead, indisposed. And Nathaniel walked into that reading room in a coat that cost more than Abigail earned in a year, and he saw her at the table, and he stopped dead. She did not look up. "Miss Harper." His voice was pitched to Carrie as always. "How very enterprising, making yourself at home in a gentleman's institution. It's a reading room, Mr. Whitmore." She turned a page. "It's for reading. I'm reading. If you'd like to read, there are chairs." A few of the board members filing past heard it. One of them, old Dr. Ellery, a naturalist 70 if he was a day, made a small sound that might have been a cough and might have been a laugh, and moved on into the chamber. Whitmore's face tightened. "You think you're very clever. I think I'm reasonably clever. I don't have to think it very hard. It's not a demanding room. You won't be laughing when they throw your name out, and they will, you know. Not one man in that room will vote to hand the Perkins collection to he searched for it, to a woman with dirt on her fingers and a dead debtor for a father." And here Abigail Harper set down her pen and looked up at him for the first time, and her voice when it came was not angry at all. It was quiet and clear, and it carried because she meant it to. "My father, Mr. Whitmore, translated Thucydides at 19 and taught the fathers of half the men in that room. He died poor because he spent his life giving away what he knew instead of selling it, which is more than can be said for anyone in your family for 3 generations. You may insult me all you like. I've a thick skin and a long afternoon and nothing better to do. But you'll leave my father out of your mouth because you're not fit to say his name, and everyone in this room who ever sat in his lecture hall knows it." The reading room had gone silent. And from the doorway of the board chamber where he had stopped to listen, old Dr. Ellery said in a dry and carrying voice, "I sat in his lecture hall in the year 91. Best mind I ever met before or since." He looked at Whitmore over his spectacles. "You'd be the Whitmore boy. I taught your father too. He was not the best mind I ever met." And he turned and went into the chamber, and this time there was no mistaking the sound the other members made. Whitmore stood very still, his face gone the color of tallow. And then he walked into the chamber without another word, and Abigail picked her pen back up, and her hand, Ethan saw from the back of the room, was perfectly steady. He had never in his life wanted so badly to say something and kept so completely silent. The board argued for 3 hours. Abigail sat at her table the whole time and worked and did not stop, and the doors were thick but not thick enough, and every so often a voice would rise loud enough to carry irregular, unprecedented. What will people say? The fee, the precedent, a woman. And every time it did, she simply turned another page and let the great windows do their work, because the longer she sat there visibly, competently, unarguably doing the job, the more absurd the argument on the other side of the door became. Ethan understood watching that this was the whole of her strategy, and it was diabolical. She had not asked to make a speech. She had not asked to plead her case. She had simply arranged matters so that the board had to look at the evidence of her the entire time they debated the theory of her, and no theory survives long against the thing itself. At the second hour, Pratt the librarian crept over to her white-faced. "Miss Harper," he whispered, you should go. It's turning ugly. Mr. Whitmore's saying things about you and Mr. Caldwell, things I can't repeat. And some of them are some of the older men are nodding, and I'm afraid, let them nod." She didn't look up. "Nodding's free. It's the vote that costs. But if they—" "Mr. Pratt." She set down her pen and looked at him kindly because he was young and frightened and had done her a good turn. I've spent my whole life in rooms where powerful men said ugly things about me while I did the work they couldn't. This is not new to me. The only thing that's new is that this time the doors open a crack and the whole town's listening. Let them talk. Every ugly word Whitmore says, he says in front of Dr. Ellery. And Dr. Ellery remembers my father and Dr. Ellery is the most respected man on that board. And Whitmore is a boy sent to do his father's errand, who's just been reminded in public that his own father was a mediocrity. He's losing Mr. Pratt. He just doesn't know it yet, because men like him never know they're losing until it's already done. She picked her pen back up. Go and sit down, and stop looking at the door. It makes you look worried, and we're not worried. Ethan from the back thought we. She'd said we. He held on to it. At the third hour, the doors opened. The board members filed out, and their faces gave nothing away. And Abigail did not stand up, did not stop working, forced them once again to come to her, and Ethan loved her for it so fiercely and so suddenly that it frightened him. Dr. Ellery came to the table. He looked down at the work she'd done, at the crate she'd half-emptied, at the neat catalog she'd built in 3 hours that the institution had failed to build in 2 years, and he was quiet a moment. "Young woman," he said, "in 3 hours, you've made more order of the Perkins collection than the last 2 men made in a 12-month between them." "It's not difficult, sir. It's only patient. Most people mistake the two." He picked up one of her cards, read it, set it down. "The board has voted." The whole reading room held its breath. Ethan's own heart had stopped. "We have voted," Dr. Ellery said, "to not engage you to catalog the Perkins bequest." The floor dropped out of Ethan's chest. Across the room he saw Whitmore by the door permit himself the beginning of a smile. "We have voted instead," Dr. Ellery continued in the same dry, unhurried voice, "to appoint you curator of it, at a curator's salary, with a curator's authority, and a curator's name upon the catalog when it's done, on the grounds that engaging you as a mere cataloger at a cataloger's fee when you have plainly the skill of a curator would be an insult to the institution's intelligence. And this institution, whatever else may be said of it, does not enjoy being made to look a fool by its own timidity." He almost smiled. The vote was not close. Once we stopped arguing about your father and your sex and Mr. Whitmore's opinions and actually looked out the door at what you were doing, it became rather difficult to argue at all. Abigail Harper sat very still. For once in her life she had nothing to say. "There is a condition," Ellery added. "Of course there is." Her voice came out not quite even. "You'll take on a student, 2 if you'll have them. There are young men in this town, and I'm given to understand 1 or 2 young women, though we don't speak of it loudly yet, who ought to learn to do what you do, and there's no one to teach them because the last generation who could is mostly dead, your father among them." He looked at her steadily. "You know the argument in the margins, Miss Harper. Dr. Ellery has heard about your little speech on the subject. It's traveled. These things travel. Well, nobody's added a hand to that argument in 20 years because nobody's teaching the young to read it. I'd have you teach them. Consider it part of the post. And that, not the salary, not the title, not the vindication in front of the whole town, that was the thing that finally broke her composure. Ethan watched it happen. Her chin, which had held so steady through Whitmore, and through the 3 hours, and through the terrible dropping moment of, "We have voted to not engage you." Her chin trembled, and her eyes went bright, and she pressed her ink-stained hand flat against the table to steady herself. "My father," she said, and stopped and started again. "My father wanted to teach. At the end. He couldn't get a post because he wouldn't flatter the right men. He used to say the argument was dying because no one was left to hand it on." She looked up at the old man. "You're asking me to do the thing he died wishing he could." "I'm asking you to do your job," said Dr. Ellery gently, "which happens to be the thing your father would have wanted. Those aren't always the same. You're fortunate this once that they are." He straightened. "Report Monday. Mr. Pratt will show you your rooms. You'll have your own at the Athenaeum's expense, which will put a stop to certain rumors that I'm told have been circulating. Since a woman with her own quarters and her own salary at a public institution is difficult to describe as anyone's kept anything. His eye slid very briefly to Whitmore by the door, and there was nothing kind in it at all. "Good day, Curator Harper." He left. The board followed, and Nathaniel Whitmore, who had come to watch her thrown down and had instead watched her raised up higher than any woman in Boston had ever stood, turned on his heel and walked out into the street without a word, and the reading room began tentatively to fill with the sound of people talking about what they had just seen. Abigail Harper sat alone at the long table with her half-emptied crate and her neat little cards, and she did not move. And Ethan Caldwell, bound by his oath, still silent, still at the back of the room, could only stand and watch her, not move. And it was the hardest thing he'd done. Yet, harder than his father's study, harder than the hour at the window, because every particle of him wanted to cross the room. She saw him. She lifted her head and found him at the back and across the whole length of the great reading room, over the tables and the murmuring people and the light from the tall windows. She looked at him, and Ethan looked back, and neither of them moved, and neither of them needed to, because the thing that passed between them then was the loudest silent thing either of them had ever felt. Then, very slightly, Abigail Harper tipped her head toward the door. "Come here," it said. "You may come here now. I'm releasing you from your oath." And Ethan crossed the room. He crossed it slowly, the way he'd crossed the first one, and the people fell quiet as he passed, because they knew who he was, and they knew what this was, and by the time he reached her table, the whole reading room was watching, and neither of them cared. He stopped an arm's length away. "Curator Harper," he said. "Mr. Caldwell." "I didn't say a word. 3 hours, not one word. I want that noted." "It's noted. It may be the single most difficult thing you've ever done." It was, by a distance. He looked down at her work, at the order she'd made, at the impossible thing done in an afternoon. "I've never been so proud of anyone in my life, and I had nothing to do with any of it, and that's the best part. You didn't win because of my name. You won in spite of it. You made them forget the letter, forget Whitmore, forget me. You made them look at nothing but the work, and the work won." He shook his head slowly. "You said you'd unmake his lie by making yourself true. I didn't fully understand it till just now. I hardly understood it myself," she admitted. Her voice had gone soft, all the fight drained out of it, and what was left underneath was something more fragile and more real. "I gambled everything, Mr. Caldwell. I told you I would. And for 3 hours behind that door, I thought I'd lost it. When Ellery said we voted to not engage you, for 1 second, I thought I've done it. I've ruined myself. I reached above my station in front of the whole town, and now I have nothing." Her breath caught. And then he said, "Curator. And I've spent my whole life keeping my composure in rooms that wanted to break it, and one kind old man says curator and asks me to teach the young the way my father wanted to, and I nearly wept in front of the entire Athenaeum." "You didn't. I nearly did." "Nearly's not the same animal," Ethan said. "You told me that. Feelings and consequences. You held. You always hold." He hesitated, and then, because they were past the point of not saying things, he said it. "But you don't have to hold with me. That's the thing I've been trying to work out how to tell you. In front of the board, in front of Whitmore, in front of the whole town, hold. By all means, hold like iron. It's the most magnificent thing I've ever seen. But when it's just us, in the library, over the cold coffee, you don't have to." He looked at her. "You've spent your whole life with no one it was safe to set the weight down in front of. I'm asking to be that. Not to carry it for you. I know better now. I'll not try to let you anything ever again, just to be the one room where you're allowed to put it down." Abigail Harper looked up at him for a long moment. And then, in the middle of the Boston Athenaeum, in front of everyone, she did a thing that undid him completely. She reached out and took his hand. Her right hand, the ink-stained one. And she held it on the table in plain view, where the whole town could see the poor scholar's daughter and the wealthiest man in Massachusetts, hand in hand, in the light of the great windows. And she did not care who saw, and the not caring was itself the most public thing she had ever done. "I trusted you once," she said quietly. "And it cost me. I told you it wouldn't happen again. And then you kept your oath for 3 hours when every bone in your body wanted to cross that room, and you let me stand at your window for an hour without coming near, and you learned to say, asked instead of let. And Mr. Caldwell, do you know how few people ever change a single thing about themselves for another soul? In my whole life I've met two. My father was one." She held his hand tighter. "So I'll trust you again. All the way this time, not 1 inch. Because you've shown me you can stand still, and standing still for a man like you is the truest thing you could possibly give me." Ethan Caldwell stood in the middle of the Athenaeum, holding the ink-stained hand of the only true thing he'd ever found, and could not speak. "But understand," she went on, and now there was the ghost of her old fierceness back in it. "Trusting you and needing you are not the same animal either. I've a salary now, my own rooms, a title with my name on it that no man gave me and no man can take. I don't need saving anymore. Ethan Caldwell, and I never really did. I only needed the door held open long enough to walk through it myself. So if you're staying," she looked up at him, "and I rather hope you're staying, it won't be because I need you. It'll be because I chose you, freely, off my own 2 feet. Do you understand the difference?" "I understand it," Ethan said, and his voice was rough. "I've understood it since the servants' hall. You told me that first night you'd not spend your life grateful to a man for doing what any decent person ought. I heard you. It took me a while to believe you, but I heard you." He turned her hand over in his, gently, and looked at the ink on her fingers, the mark she'd been shamed for, the mark he'd have kissed if the whole town weren't watching. "I don't want your gratitude, Abigail. I never did. Whitmore wanted a woman who'd be grateful. My father wanted a marriage that'd be useful. This whole town wants people who'll be convenient. I want the one thing none of them can stand, which is a woman who'd tell me to my face I was a fool and be right about it. I want the argument in the margins, out loud, for the rest of my life." For a moment, she just looked at him, and something moved across her face that he'd never seen there before, some door opening that had been shut so long she'd forgotten it could open. "That," she said unsteadily, "is very nearly a proposal, Mr. Caldwell, and we're in a library." "Is it a bad place for one?" "It's the only place for one. But you'll not do it here, and you'll not do it now, and you'll not do it like this, because I've had a very long day, and I've just been made a curator, and I've not eaten since breakfast, and a woman deserves to be able to think clearly when a thing like that is asked of her." She released his hand gently, deliberately. Not a rejection, not yet. And there was a smile pulling at her mouth now, a real one, the first fully real one he'd ever seen from her. "So when you ask me if you ask me, you'll do it properly, and you'll do it when I've had supper, and you'll do it knowing that I'll say yes or no on the merits, and not one particle of it will have to do with your money, because I've my own now, thank God, and it's ruined me for being bought." She stood and gathered her cards and looked at him. "Now, walk me out. Not to protect me, not to see me safe, just because I'd like the company and because I've earned, I think, one walk through this town on the arm of a man who crossed a room for me, not to save me, but because I fixed his Latin." Ethan offered his arm. She took it, and they walked the length of the great reading room together, past the tables and the staring faces and the whispered talk already beginning to reshape itself into the new story. Not the story of the kept woman and her patron, but the far more dangerous one of the curator, and the man who'd waited 3 hours in the back of the room for permission to cross it and out through the tall doors into the summer street, where the light was long and gold, and the whole town lay before them. And Abigail Harper walked into it with her ink-stained hand on his arm, and her head high, and her name at last entirely her own. Behind them in the emptying reading room, old Dr. Ellery watched them go, and turned to Pratt the librarian and said dryly, "Well, that's the last we'll see of that nonsense about kept women." He picked up one of Abigail's cards and studied the small exact hand. You know, Pratt, her father wrote just like this. Small, precise. Every letter meant. He set it down. The argument doesn't die, you see. That's the thing they never understand, the Whitmores of the world. You can starve a man and take his books and even bury him poor, but if he's handed the thing on to one true mind before he goes... He nodded toward the doors, toward the two figures receding into the golden street. Then it just keeps going, one hand answering another, right down the centuries. He picked up his hat. Lock up the Perkins crate, there's a good fellow. The curator will want it in the morning. And in a fine house on Beacon Hill, Nathaniel Whitmore sat alone with a glass of brandy and a cold supper he did not eat, and turned over in his mind the sound of the whole reading room going quiet, as Ethan Caldwell crossed the floor and understood for the first time that he had not lost a woman. He had lost to one, and that was a different kind of wound entirely, and it did not close, and by the time the brandy was gone, he had begun slowly, coldly, in the patient, malicious way of a man who has all the time and money in the world, and nothing left to do with it, but nurse a grievance to think about how a man in his position might yet find the one thing a curator with her own salary and her own rooms and her own name could still, even now, be made to lose. The thing a curator could still be made to lose. Nathaniel Whitmore decided was not her salary, and not her rooms, and not her name. It was her father. He worked it out slowly over a fortnight in the cold, patient way of a man with nothing better to do. He could not touch Abigail Harper directly anymore. She was too visible now, too admired too plainly. The town's new curiosity, and to attack her openly would only raise her higher. But a dead man had no defenders. A dead man could be made to say anything. And if the daughter's whole standing rested as it plainly did on the father's name, on old Josiah Harper, the great scholar, the man doctor, Ellery had praised in front of the whole reading room, then the surest way to unmake the daughter was to unmake the father. So Nathaniel Whitmore went looking for a knife, and he found one in the estate papers of the late Josiah Harper, and it was better than anything he could have invented. Abigail heard of it the way she heard of most things, now early, and from a frightened Pratt who came to her rooms at the Athenaeum before 8 in the morning with his hat crushed in his hands. Miss Harper, curator, there's you must hear it from me before you hear it in the street. He could barely get the words out. Mr. Whitmore has published a pamphlet about your father. She set down her pen very carefully. What kind of pamphlet? He's Miss Harper. He says your father was a thief. He says the great translations, the Thucydides, the ones that made his name. He says they weren't your father's. He says Josiah Harper stole them from a colleague who died young, a man named Ashby, and published them under his own name, and that the whole of his reputation was built on a dead man's work. Pratt was nearly in tears. And he's got papers, letters. He says he has letters that prove it in Ashby's own hand, and he's printed extracts, and it's Miss Harper. It's all over the hill by now. Everyone's reading it, and they're saying, if the father was a fraud, then the daughter's no scholar either. She's just a fraud's child playing at it, and the Athenaeum's been made a fool of, and... Stop. Her voice cut clean through his rising panic. Stop, breathe, sit down. She waited until he sat. Her own hands, he saw, had gone very still, not trembling, still the terrible stillness he'd seen in her once before the day of the letter. Now, slowly. He has letters, in Ashby's hand, claiming my father stole the translations. And extracts are printed. Have you seen the pamphlet itself? Aye. Pratt fumbled in his coat and produced it crumpled and held it out to her. She took it. She read it. She read it twice all the way through, and Pratt watched her face and could not read it at all, because it did not change. It's clever, she said at last quietly. I'll grant him that. It's the cleverest thing he's done. Because there was an Ashby. Thomas Ashby. He was real a friend of my father's, a brilliant man, died at 29 of a fever, and my father grieved him the rest of his life. They worked together, the two of them, when they were young. So it's not a lie built on nothing. It's a lie built on a true foundation, which is the only kind that stands. She set the pamphlet down. and half of what he prints from Ashby's letters is probably genuine. That's what makes it deadly. He's taken real letters from a real friendship and arranged them so that collaboration looks like theft. Then it's not true. Of course it's not true. For the first time, something flashed in her not-panic fury, cold and total. My father would have cut off his own hand before he put his name to another man's work. He starved, rather than sell books that were rightfully his. Do you imagine a man like that would steal another man's mind? It's obscene. It's the exact opposite of everything he was, which is precisely why Whitmore chose it, because the bigger the lie, the more it wounds. And there's no lie bigger than accusing the most honest man who ever lived of the one thing he could never have done. Her jaw was tight. But it doesn't matter that it's not true, Mr. Pratt. We learned that lesson already, you and I. In this town said is true, and it's said now, in print, with extracts. Pratt swallowed. The board is meeting this afternoon. About your post. Abigail went very still again. They're meeting to decide whether to keep me. Dr. Ellery is Miss Harper. Dr. Ellery is trying to hold them, but there are men on that board who never wanted you, and now they've a reason, and they're saying the institution can't be seen to employ the daughter of a proven fraud, and even Dr. Ellery can't stop them arguing it, and Mr. Whitmore's father is pressing hard. And... He stopped. They meet at 3. She looked at the clock. It was not yet 9. Then I have 6 hours, Abigail said, to prove a dead man innocent of a crime he didn't commit, using nothing but the truth against a man who spent a fortnight arranging the lie. She stood. Send for Mr. Caldwell. Tell him to meet me at the old rooms on Salem Street. My father's rooms where he died, they've been let cheap to a bookbinder since, and the man owes me a kindness. Tell Ethan to bring money for the binder and to come now. She was already reaching for her shawl. And Mr. Pratt, you did right coming to me first. You've courage. Your father'd be proud. Now go, and don't let anyone see you looking frightened. We're not frightened, we're busy.
Cha-ta-ta.
Ethan found her on her knees on the floor of a dead man's rooms, elbow deep in a trunk of papers, with a bewildered bookbinder hovering behind her. Whitmore's published that your father... I know what he's published. I've read it. Get down here and help me. And mind you, keep the letters in the order you find them. Order matters more than you'd think. She didn't look up. Mr. Finch here kept my father's papers when the creditors took the books. They didn't want papers. Papers won't sell, and I paid him $1 a year to keep the trunk dry. And I never thought I'd need it, and thank God I'm a woman who keeps things. She pulled out a bundle tied in faded ribbon. Here, Ashby's letters to my father. The real ones. All of them. 20 years of friendship in order dated, and I know them near by heart because I read them as a girl. Ethan knelt beside her. How does this help? He's got Ashby letters too. His say your father stole the work. His say what he wants them to say because he's printed extracts. She spread the bundle out with swift, sure hands. That's the whole trick, Ethan. You print a sentence out of a letter, and it can mean anything. But a letter entire in order with the ones around it that can only mean one thing, which is what actually happened. Look. She found a letter, held it out. Read that. Ashby to my father the year they were both 24. Read it out. Ethan read haltingly, the old ink faint. Josiah, I cannot make the 6th book come right. The Greek defeats me, and you see 3 moves ahead of me as always. Take it. Finish it. Put both our names to it if the publisher will allow, and if he will not put yours for a book. With your name will sell, and a book with mine will not. And I had rather the work live under your name than die under mine. We are one mind in this, you and I. What does it matter which head it wears? Ethan looked up. Ashby gave it to him. Ashby begged him to take it. Her voice had gone thick. And here the next one dated a month on my father writing back, refusing, saying he'll not put his name to Ashby's work. It's not right, they'll publish jointly or not at all. And here Ashby again insisting. Back and forth, 6 letters, 2 young men each trying to give the other the credit until Ashby. She stopped and pressed her lips together until Ashby died. Of the fever, at 29. And my father published the work at last years later, and he put both their names on it, Ethan. Both. Ashby and Harper always on every edition. Whitmore's pamphlet leaves that out. He prints the extract where Ashby says, "Put yours for a book with your name will sell," and he stops there and makes it sound like theft, when the very next line and the whole 20 years around it is the story of the most generous friendship two scholars ever had. Ethan sat back on his heels, staring at the letters spread across the dead man's floor. "Abigail, this doesn't just clear your father. This is—" "I know what it is." Her eyes were bright and hard. "It's the noose Whitmore made turned around his neck. He picked this lie because he thought a dead man couldn't answer it. He didn't reckon on the dead man's daughter keeping a trunk in a bookbinder's back room for 8 years because she couldn't bear to throw away the last of him." She began with swift, sure fingers to sort the letters into sequence. "He spent a fortnight arranging a lie, and I'm about to spend 6 hours arranging the truth, and the truth's already in order, because it happened in order, because it's true. That's the one advantage the truth has always got, Ethan, and it's the one men like Whitmore never account for. A lie has to be built. The truth only has to be found."
Chapter A.
But it was not so simple, and she knew it, and the knowing sat in her like a stone, even as she sorted. "There's a problem," she said when the letters were laid out. "What problem? This is airtight. The problem is Ashby's hand." She sat back. "Whitmore's printed extracts he claims are from Ashby's letters, the ones that make it look like theft. Now, either he has forged them outright, in which case he's a criminal, and we can destroy him, or he has real Ashby letters of his own from some other source, and he's quoting them dishonestly out of context. And I don't know which. And it matters enormously which, because if I stand up this afternoon and call him a forger, and it turns out the extracts are real letters merely twisted, then I'm the liar in front of the board, and it's over." Her jaw worked. "I need to know where he got his Ashby letters. And I've 6 hours and I don't know, and here Ethan Caldwell, who had spent this whole story learning when to be silent, spoke. "I know where he got them." She turned. "Ashby had no family," Ethan said slowly, working it out even as he said it. "You told me. Died young, no wife, no children. So where do a dead bachelor's papers go? They go to whoever buys the estate. And I know Abigail. I know because my father does this. It's a thing rich men do. I know that the Ashby effects were sold at auction decades ago in a job lot, papers and all, to whoever'd take them for the value of the trunk." He was on his feet now, "and I'd wager my whole fortune that Whitmore went and found them, or found whoever held them in this last fortnight. Which means there's a record, a bill of sale, a provenance. Because papers that pass through an auction house leave a trail. Always, it's how the trade works. And if Whitmore bought Ashby's letters inside the last 2 weeks after my nomination of you, after he'd already begun looking for a knife, then we can prove," Abigail breathed, "that he went hunting for them on purpose. That he sought out a dead man's private letters with the deliberate aim of destroying my father's name to get at me, which turns it from a scholar's disagreement into a malicious campaign." She stood too fast. "Ethan, can you find the bill of sale today in time? My father sits on half the boards in this town, including one that shares a clerk with the auction house on Cornhill. I can be there and back inside 2 hours." He was already reaching for his hat. "But Abigail, my father. If I use his name to do this, I use it against Whitmore's father, and those 2 men have to sit on the bank board together till they die, and my father will—" She looked at him, and he stopped and heard what he was saying, and heard the ghost of the old Ethan in it, the man who weighed his father's disapproval, who danced to the threat of being cut off, who had stood in the study and been told, "Send the girl back." "Never mind," Ethan said quietly. "I don't know why I said that. It doesn't signify. Let my father sit uncomfortable at his bank board for the rest of his life. I'd trade 100 of his comfortable afternoons for 1 hour of you having what's yours." He put on his hat. "I'll have the bill of sale by 2. Be at the Athenaeum at 3 with the letters in order, and Abigail." "What?" He looked at her a moment. "Your father kept another man's name on the work for 20 years when he could have had all the glory himself. He starved sooner than sell what was his, and he shared the credit for what he'd earned. I never met him. But I've read every one of these letters now in the last hour, and I want to tell you, I understand exactly where you come from. You didn't fall from nowhere." "You're the argument," continued, his hand answering into yours. He tipped his hat, the old gesture, and there was nothing mocking in it now. "I'll not let a Whitmore blot it, not while I've a name to spend." And he was gone out into the street, running the wealthiest man in Massachusetts, running down Salem Street in the summer heat, like a boy sent for the doctor. And Abigail Harper knelt back down on her father's floor, among her father's letters, and pressed one of them briefly to her lips, and then got back to work, because there were 6 hours, and now perhaps only 4, and the truth was in order, but it still had to be carried into the room. Ethan was not back by 2. He was not back by 1:30. Abigail stood on the steps of the Athenaeum with the bundle of letters clutched against her, and watched the board members file in past her. Dr. Ellery, who touched his hat to her gravely, the elder Whitmore, who did not look at her at all, Nathaniel Whitmore, who looked at her and smiled the small, cold smile of a man who has already won, and is only waiting for the other party to notice. "Miss Harper!" He paused on the step above her. "Or is it still curator? I do lose track. These things change so quickly." He glanced at the bundle in her arms. "Letters. How touching. Do you mean to read us your father's correspondence?" "I've read a good deal of it myself lately. Fascinating material, though I confess I found the parts about Mr. Ashby rather damning." "You found the parts you printed damning. I imagine you found the parts you left out inconvenient." Something flickered behind his eyes, but he recovered. "You'll have your say inside, of course. We're all very fair here. And when you've had it, when you've read your little love letters between 2 dead men and asked us all to take your word for what they mean, the board will vote. And this time, Miss Harper, no old man's fondness for your father is going to save you, because the question isn't whether you can catalog books. Everyone knows you can. The question is whether the Boston Athenaeum can be seen to shelter the family of a fraud. And the answer to that, I'm afraid, is no." The smile again. "You reached too high. People like you always do. It's almost the definition of people like you." He turned to go in. 3 o'clock. Don't be late. It would be a shame to be voted out in your absence." And he went in, and the great doors closed behind him. And Abigail Harper stood alone on the steps, with her father's letters and no Ethan, and 15 minutes on the clock. She waited. 10 minutes. 12. At 13 minutes, she made herself turn toward the doors, because she would go in with the letters alone, if she had to. The letters were enough to clear her father even without the bill of sale. Not enough to destroy Whitmore, but enough to save the name. And the name was what mattered. The name was her father, and she would carry it into that room by herself, if that was what she had to do, because she had always in the end carried everything by herself. Abigail. She turned. Ethan Caldwell was running up the street coatless, his cravat gone, papers in his fist, and his face, she had never seen his face like that. He took the steps 3 at a time and seized her arm, and he was breathing too hard to speak for a moment. "I have it," he gasped. "I have it. And Abigail, it's worse than we thought. It's better than we thought." He pressed the papers into her hands. The bill of sale, Ashby's papers, sold at auction in the year 4 to a private buyer, and the buyer Abigail, the buyer of Thomas Ashby's letters 22 years ago. She looked down at the bill of sale, and her breath stopped. "Was Josiah Harper," Ethan said. Your father bought them. Your father bought his dead friend's letters at auction the moment they came up so that no one could ever do to Ashby's memory what Whitmore's just tried to do to his. He kept them safe for 22 years, which means—" He was gripping her arms now, both of them, and there were nearly tears in his eyes. "Abigail, which means Whitmore's letters can't be Ashby's originals. Your father owned every original Ashby letter in existence, and they're in that trunk on Salem Street this minute. So whatever Whitmore's got, whatever he printed those extracts from. "Are forgeries?" Abigail whispered. "They have to be. They're forgeries. He couldn't find the real letters because my father had them all, so he made his own. He committed forgery to accuse a dead man of theft." She was shaking now, the letters, and the bill of sale trembling in her hands. "Ethan, he didn't just twist the truth. He manufactured it, in print, under a false hand. That's not a pamphlet. That's a crime." "That's a crime," Ethan agreed. "And you're about to walk into a room where he's sitting beside his father and half the board, and lay it on the table, and there is not one thing in this world he can do to stop you, because the proof is in your hands, and the originals are in a trunk, and the bill of sale has his own auction house's seal on it." He straightened and pushed his ruined hair back and looked at her. "I'd say I'll come in with you, but I gave my word once I'd let you walk into that room on your own 2 feet, so I'll ask instead the way you taught me. Abigail Harper, do you want me in that room, or do you want to walk in alone?" And Abigail looked at him, at this man who had learned finally all the way down to ask, instead of to let, to run himself ragged, fetching her the truth, and then hand it to her and step back so she could be the one to carry it in, and something in her chest that had been clenched tight. Her whole life came quietly, completely undone. "Come in," she said. "Not behind me, not in front of me, beside me. There's a difference, and I want the whole board to see you know it." "Beside you," Ethan said. "I can do beside you. I've been practicing." She almost laughed. She almost wept. She did neither because there was no time, and because she was Josiah Harper's daughter, and there was work to do. She squared the papers in her hands, the letters in their true order. The bill of sale with its damning seal, 22 years of a dead man's love for a dead friend, and the proof that another man had tried to poison all of it, and she turned toward the great doors of the Boston Athenaeum. "Then open the door, Mr. Caldwell," she said. "And mind you, don't get ahead of me." He opened the door. They went in together, and inside at the head of the long table, Nathaniel Whitmore looked up with his cold, small smile already in place, and saw the woman he'd meant to ruin walk in, not broken but blazing with papers in her hands, and Ethan Caldwell at her shoulder, and behind that smile for the very first time in his gilded and untroubled life, something in Nathaniel Whitmore went cold and still and afraid. The board chamber went quiet as they entered, and Abigail Harper walked to the foot of the long table and set her papers down and did not sit, because a person who sits can be talked over, and she had not come to be talked over. "Curator Harper." Dr. Ellery at the far end rose halfway in his chair, a courtesy, and the only man there who offered it. "You've asked to address the board before we vote. Highly irregular. I've allowed it over objection." His eyes moved briefly to the elder Whitmore beside him. "You have the floor. Use it well. It may not be offered twice." "I don't need it twice." Nathaniel Whitmore leaned back in his chair, recovering himself, the cold smile sliding back into place now that the first shock of her had passed. "This is beneath the board's time. She'll read us letters and ask us to trust her reading of them. The daughter vouching for the father. Forgive me if I find the witness less than impartial." "You'll have your chance to speak, Mr. Whitmore." Abigail did not look at him. She looked at the board. "You published a pamphlet. In it you claim my father, Josiah Harper, stole the Thucydides translations from a dead colleague named Thomas Ashby, and built his reputation on another man's work. You printed extracts you represent as coming from Ashby's own letters. On the strength of that, this board is meeting to decide whether to strip me of my post." She placed one hand flat on the papers. "I'm going to save you the trouble of the vote. Not by asking you to trust me. By showing you the truth in order and letting you trust that." She untied the ribbon. "These are Thomas Ashby's letters to my father, the originals, all of them dated in sequence, 20 years of them." She began to lay them out along the table one by one, sliding them toward the members. "Read them in order, not the extract Mr. Whitmore chose, the whole. And you'll find that Ashby did not have his work stolen. Ashby begged my father to take it, because Ashby was dying and knew it, and knew his own name would not sell a book, and wanted the work to live, even if it lived under another man's name. And my father refused. 6 times in writing in these letters, he refused. and when at last he published years after Ashby was in the ground, he put both their names upon it. Ashby and Harper, on every edition, every one. Mr. Whitmore's pamphlet omits that. It omits the refusals. It omits the joint authorship. It prints one half-sentence torn from the middle of the most generous friendship two scholars ever had, and calls generosity a theft. Old Dr. Ellery had picked up the letters. He was reading. So were two others. The room had gone very still. "That's a matter of interpretation," Nathaniel said, but there was a thread of strain in it now. "You show letters. I show letters. Yours say one thing, mine another. Who is the board to believe?" "Yes." Abigail turned to him at last. "Let's speak about your letters, Mr. Whitmore. The ones you printed. The Ashby letters that make it look like theft. I have a question about them, and it's a simple one, and I'd like you to answer it in front of the board." She let the silence stretch one beat. "Where did you get them?" From Ashby's effects. His papers. Sold at auction after his death, as such things are." "You're certain of that?" "Entirely." He was firmer now on ground he'd prepared. "The Ashby estate was sold at auction in the year 4. I traced the papers. I acquired the relevant letters. Their provenance is impeccable, which is more than can be said for a bundle a grieving daughter produces from God knows where the morning of a vote." "The year 4. Abigail nodded slowly. "The Ashby estate sold at auction year 4. You're quite certain of the year?" "I've said so twice." And here she picked up the last paper, the one Ethan had run himself ragged to fetch, and she held it up so the board could see the auction house's seal. "Then perhaps you can explain," she said, "why the auction house's own bill of sale sealed, witnessed, and dated the 11th of March year 4 records that the entire Ashby collection of papers and letters was purchased in a single lot by one buyer." She let the seal catch the light. "And the buyer's name, gentlemen, recorded here in the auction house's hand is Josiah Harper." The room made a sound. "My father," Abigail said into it, "bought every letter Thomas Ashby ever wrote, 22 years ago, the instant they came up for sale, because he could not bear the thought of a stranger owning his dead friend's private words, the very thing that has now in fact come to pass in the shape of Mr. Whitmore's pamphlet. He kept them safe for the rest of his life. They passed to me. They are this morning in a bookbinder's trunk on Salem Street, every original in existence, and I can produce them, and Dr. Ellery, who knew both men, can authenticate the hand." She lowered the bill of sale. "Which raises a difficulty for Mr. Whitmore. Because if my father owned every genuine Ashby letter, and this seal proves he did, then the letters Mr. Whitmore printed cannot be genuine. There are no genuine ones left for him to have found." She looked at Nathaniel, and her voice did not rise. And that was the terrible thing, it did not rise at all. "So either the board is to believe that a sealed auction record witnessed 22 years ago is a forgery, or the letters in Mr. Whitmore's pamphlet are. There is no third possibility. And I know which I'd wager on, and I think, gentlemen, so do you." "So." Nathaniel Whitmore had gone white. This proves nothing. Papers can be there. Could be copies, other letters, copies in Ashby's own hand, Mr. Whitmore. Written by a man who's been dead 30 years. That somehow escaped the auction. Your own bill of sale says, was sold entire in one lot to one buyer." Abigail set the bill of sale down on the table, gently beside the letters, the truth laid out end to end. "No. You went looking for a weapon to use against me. You found that Ashby had died young and friendless, and that his memory couldn't defend itself. You didn't know my father had already defended it 22 years ago by buying every word the man ever wrote. So when you couldn't find real letters to twist because there were none to find, you made your own. You sat down and forged the hand of a dead scholar to accuse the most honest man I ever knew of the one crime he'd have died sooner than commit. And you printed it, under seal of the press. That's not a scholarly dispute, sir." Now at last, something came into her voice, low and shaking with 23 years of it. "That's forgery and libel and the desecration of 2 graves, and you did it because a woman with ink on her hands would not be ashamed into the dark for your convenience." The elder Whitmore had risen from his chair. He was staring at his son. "Nathaniel." His voice was terrible and quiet. "Tell me she's wrong." "Father, tell me she is wrong. Tell me you did not forge a dead man's hand and put it in print with my name behind you before this board where I sit." He was gray. "Did you find those letters, or did you make them answer me? Answer me as though your whole life depended on it, because before God, boy, it does." And Nathaniel Whitmore opened his mouth and found he had no letters to produce, no trunk, no seal, no auction record, nothing but the pamphlet he'd written and the forgeries he'd penned by candlelight, and he could not answer his father. And the not answering was the loudest answer any of them had ever heard. The elder Whitmore sat back down very slowly, like a man who has been struck. "Get out," he said, not loudly. "Get out of this chamber. Get out of this building. Do not speak to me until I send for you, and I do not know when I shall send for you." He put a hand over his eyes. "My God, Josiah Harper. I knew the man. I knew him. And my son forged—" He could not finish it. Nathaniel Whitmore stood. For a moment he looked at Abigail, one last look, and it had no smile in it. Now, none at all, only the raw, ruined face of a man watching the whole architecture of his life come down at once. And then he walked out of the chamber, and the great door closed behind him, and he was gone out of the room, and out of the story, and out of the town within the month, sent to a cousin's counting house in Baltimore, where no one had heard of the Harpers, and no one ever would. Chapter 8. The chamber sat in stunned silence. Dr. Ellery was the one to break it. He gathered the letters gently and squared them and looked down the length of the table at Abigail Harper standing at the foot of it. "Curator Harper," he said, "I move that the pamphlet be denounced by this board in print at the board's expense as a proven forgery, the retraction to be as public as the slander was printed and circulated to every house that received the original. I move further that the joint authorship of the Thucydides, Ashby, and Harper be formally affirmed by the Athenaeum, and a note to that effect placed in every copy in our collection, so the record stands true in perpetuity." He looked around this table. "And I move that we hear no further discussion whatsoever regarding this board's engagement of Curator Harper, whose post is not now and never was in any honest question, and whose conduct this morning has done this institution more credit than this institution has lately done itself. Do I have a second?" "Seconded," said 3 men at once. The vote was unanimous. Even the men who had never wanted her, perhaps especially those men who wanted very badly now to be seen on the right side of a thing gone so wrong, raised their hands. And Abigail Harper stood at the foot of the long table and watched a room full of the very men who'd meant to cast her out that afternoon vote instead to defend her father's name in print forever, and she did not weep, though it was a near thing, the nearest thing yet. "There is one further matter," Dr. Ellery said when it was done. He looked at her over his spectacles, and there was something almost mischievous in the old face now. "Your father wished to teach and never got the post. You've the post now and the salary and the standing. I put it to you plainly, Curator, what will you do with it?" And Abigail Harper, who had come into that room to save a dead man's name, and had ended by winning the whole of the town, drew a breath and said the thing she had been turning over in her heart for a fortnight. "I'd build a library," she said. "An open one. Not a gentleman's institution. No offense to the present company, a public one. Where a scholar's daughter with ink on her hands and no money to her name can walk in and read whatever she likes, and no man asks her father's rank at the door. Where the argument in the margins goes, on one hand, answering another for anyone with the wit to join it, regardless of what they were born to." She lifted her chin. "My father used to say knowledge hoarded is knowledge dying. I mean to let some of it live in the open. If the Athenaeum will lend its name to the founding, I'll lend my whole life to the running of it." The room was quiet a moment. Then from the back, from where he had stood the entire time beside her, but never ahead of her, silent, through all of it, keeping the last and hardest promise of all, Ethan Caldwell spoke for the first time since they'd entered. "The Caldwell collection," he said. $30,000 of books that have sat in crates for 30 years because no one in my family knew what they had. They're saved, now she saved them. They're doing no one any good, locked in my north wing." He looked at his father's empty chair, and then at Abigail, and then at the board. "I'll give them the whole collection to the founding of a public library on one condition, that Curator Harper directs it with full authority in her own name, and that the door stands open to anyone who wishes to walk through it, whatever they were born." A pause. "I'm told I've a habit of crossing rooms for this woman. It's the truest thing anyone's ever said about me. I'd like this once to cross one with her." Dr. Ellery looked from one of them to the other, and the old scholar's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Well," he said, "I believe that's rather more than a library we founded this afternoon." He rose, and the whole board rose with him. "Curator Harper, Mr. Caldwell, this board stands adjourned, and I for one am going home to write to certain gentlemen who owe this institution money to tell them what a public library will cost, and to remind them what their grandfathers' names will look like carved above its door." He gathered his hat. "Go on, the both of you. You've done enough here for one day. You've done enough here, I think, for a generation."
Dato.
They walked out together beside each other into the long gold light of the summer evening, and neither of them spoke until they were well down the steps and into the street, and it was Ethan who broke first. "You didn't need me," he said. "In there. You'd have won on the letters alone. Even without the bill of sale, you'd have saved his name with the letters. I know it. You know it. I'd have saved his name." Abigail slowed and stopped and turned to face him in the middle of the street. "I'd not have destroyed Whitmore without the bill of sale. Saving my father and ruining the man who slandered him. Those are two different victories. Ethan and I only wanted the first. You brought me the second. You ran yourself ragged across this town and used your father's name against another man's father to bring me a piece of paper I didn't strictly need, so that a bad man wouldn't just be defeated, but be finished." Her voice softened. "You didn't do it to save me. You did it because you couldn't stand to watch a true thing be lied about and let the liar walk away whole. That's not rescuing. That's the other thing. The thing you kept trying to name and couldn't." "Justice?" Ethan said. "No." She almost smiled. "Love, you great fool. It's love. You've been doing it since the ballroom and calling it principle because you didn't have the nerve to call it what it is." Ethan Caldwell stood in the middle of a Boston street in the gold light and looked at her. "You told me," he said slowly, "in the library that day, you told me I could ask, but not now. Not there, not like that. You said I was to do it properly when you'd had your supper, when you could think clearly, when not one particle of it had to do with my money." He glanced up the street and back at her. "You've your own money now, your own name, your own library near enough as of 10 minutes ago. There's no roof I'm holding over you, no debt, no favor, nothing you need from me at all. You said that was the whole point, that you'd say yes or no on the merits off your own 2 feet. He took a breath. "Have you had your supper?" "I have not," she said. "I've not eaten since breakfast, again. It's becoming a habit on the important days." "Then I'll not ask you now." "Ethan, I'll not ask you now, because you're hungry, and you can't think you said so yourself, and I'll not have you saying yes to me in a state where you can't think, because I want it clear-headed or not at all." His voice was rough, but his eyes were steady. "So here's what I'll do. I'll take you to supper, and I'll sit across from you, and I'll ask you nothing, and I'll let you eat and think and be a woman who owes me nothing and needs me for nothing. And then when you've had your supper, and you can think as clear as you did in that boardroom, then I'll ask. And whatever you say, I'll believe it's true, because I'll know it came from you free." Abigail Harper looked at him for a long moment in the gold and dying light. "You've learned," she said quietly. "You've truly learned. The man who crossed that ballroom a year ago couldn't have said that sentence. He'd have gone down on one knee in the street this instant and never once thought to ask whether I'd eaten. That man was a fool. That man was in love and didn't know how to do it without taking something. This man—" She reached out and took his hand, the ink-stained one in his plane, in the open street where the whole town could see, and she did not care, she never would again. This man's figured out that love isn't crossing the room to save someone. It's crossing it to stand beside them, and then having the decency to let them stand on their own. She held his hand tighter. "Take me to supper, Ethan Caldwell, and ask me after. And I'll tell you now, so you're not eating in suspense the whole while, the answer when you ask it is going to be yes. Not because I need you, I've made very certain I don't. Because I choose you. Freely. Off my own 2 feet. Which is the only kind of yes worth a damn, and the only kind I've got to give." Sendimi to yes he. And Ethan Caldwell, the wealthiest man in Massachusetts, who had declined 4 introductions in a single night, and been called cold and hard and impossible by every soul who'd ever tried to sell him a convenient life. Ethan Caldwell put her ink-stained hand in the crook of his arm and turned down the street toward the light and walked beside her, exactly beside her, not 1 step ahead into the whole long open evening of their lives. They built the library the next spring. It opened on a Tuesday. She'd insisted on a Tuesday for reasons Ethan understood, and no one else did, with the Caldwell collection on its shelves and the Perkins bequest catalogued at last. And old Dr. Ellery cutting the ribbon with a hand that shook a little now, and the door stood open. And it never once in all the years that followed asked a single soul who came through it what their father had been, or what their hands had touched, or what they'd been born to. Above the door, carved in stone in true Latin that Abigail checked 3 times herself, were the words her father used to say. And below them, smaller 2 names, side by side, the way her father had always printed them, the way the argument always went on one hand, answering another, right down the centuries' world without end. Because being seen was never a privilege granted by the rich to the poor, or by the high to the low, or by the men who held the doors to the woman who'd been made to stand in the corner. Being seen was a right. It always had been. And Abigail Harper had crossed her own room in the end on her own 2 feet, and built a house where no one would ever have to wait in a corner to be seen again.